Hey everybody, welcome back to the Quest for the Bestest. It's that podcast where we're taking a look at every single Best Picture winner of all time in a random order and figuring out where they go on a great big list. My name is Timo. I'm joined, of course, by Tucker, Tanner, and Abram, and a little backlog banter inside baseball here. They are all hanging out in Lincoln together. I'm stuck in Austin because of work and whatever. I'd like to be joining them, but, you know, that's what it is. Through the magic of internet, it's almost like we're all in the same room, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
Let's go with that.
And
We're all in the same place right now.
Yep. Today we are talking about the 1959 William Wyler movie. It's a classic. It's a long one. It's Ben-Hur, a quite epic movie. It's I think that's one of the genres that it's usually given is epic. Pretty. I think there's a lot to talk about. We haven't given any indication to each other of what we're going to say, so this is going to be a big surprise. But first, quite a lot of housekeeping. Usually it's just a little housekeeping to do, but we have a lot of housekeeping to go over this week because if you caught the episode from last Monday, we decided to go ahead and re-rank every film with a new ranking system. It's brand new, it's new and improved, it's better than before, and as such, we went through and retroactively applied our new thoughts to all the films that we've seen so far, all 35 of them, and given them scores. So now we give the films a score, and that score gets averaged, and then that is where that tells us where the film goes on the list based on each other. And so just to remind you, the film we saw most recently, it wasn't last week, but the week before, was Oliver, and that now sits at 33 out of 35th place on our list. So pretty far down there. We really didn't like that movie a whole lot. But who knows? Who knows what's going to happen with Ben-Hur today? I mean, what more is there to do? Go watch that episode last week. It's a real long one, but I mean, I promise you'll have a good time because, a little spoiler alert, there's a different number one. We have a different number one film. And if you are confused, the link to look at the list is in the description or on all the different platforms, so you can go look it out at yourself on the Backlog Banter official Letterboxd page. Okay, that's enough housekeeping. I want to talk about this movie.
Sure.
Who wants to give us a little recap to the best of their ability about what quite goes on in the 3.5 hours or 3 hours, 3 3/4 hours that is the total runtime of this film?
I basically watched this twice, so I think I can do this.
All right, Tanner, give it a shot.
Okay. We are back in the ye old land of Judea, Jerusalem, Nazareth, back in the year 0 AD. You know, we open on a little bit of Jesus being born, but this isn't a story about Jesus. This is a story about one man named Judah Ben-Hur. He's the wealthiest man in all of Judea until a certain set of happenstances sets him on a unfortunate course of becoming a slave to the Roman centurions. He has a falling out with his once childhood friend, but now a Roman legion, or what is he? A Roman tribune, named Messala. He becomes a slave on a slave ship. He then is adopted by a Roman centurion that he saves, and then he gets into a lot of antics, you know, some chariot races and things of that nature. And every so often, a certain Messiah will pop up in the story, and maybe he shows up at the end too, but we'll get into that, I suppose.
That's pretty concise for an inconcise movie. Yeah. That's about what happens. Initial thoughts on the film. I'm curious. Abram, what did you think to start us off?
So I got to disagree with something Tanner said in a summary. He said that this is not a story about Jesus, and I think that Ben-Hur kind of is, and this is kind of my main contention with the film. I think that it is big and incredible and unfocused. And so that definitely tempers my enjoyment a little bit. There are sequences here, like the chariot sequence, which is some of the most stunning filmmaking I have seen, period. But it's kind of put inside this story that feels a little bit slapped together. It doesn't feel particularly cohesive to me, and because of that, I'm not sure I was ever super engaged by the characters. It was always the production design and the incredible filmmaking that carried me through, because those things are awesome. But is this a religious story? Is it kind of a period piece? What's going on here? Why do these characters matter? Things of that nature. That's kind of where I take issue with Ben-Hur.
Mm-hmm. Tucker, your thoughts?
This is a long movie, and not only a long movie, a movie about olden times, and a lot of things about this movie shouldn't connect with me But I think that this movie is incredible. I've got complaints as it comes to a close, but for the vast majority of the runtime, I think it's unmatched. And usually when I'm watching a Best Picture winner, I think to myself, well, why did this win Best Picture? And we had that question come up for a couple things, especially recently, where we're like, that doesn't make a lot of sense. But
This one's
is there any question that
clear.
this film could win Best Picture? I think this is like one of the defining. No, well, of course, from every like conceivable production value perspective, this was probably the greatest film that came out that year. Even just from filmmaking, we can talk about the story and the characters and the acting and all that, but I think this film is insane. And I'm a big William Wyler fan now. I've seen 4 of his movies this year, and I've liked all of them. Some have loved some of them. So he's got a track record, and we still got one of his movies that won Best Picture that's coming up eventually, which is exciting. We're not done with our boy Billy.
Tanner.
I think this film, I agree with Tucker in this. This film was far and away the clear choice for Best Picture winner this year. I mean, we talked about this while Abram and Tucker and I were watching it. It is just insane. Some of the detail and like this, maybe so much not the detail, but the sheer scale of the production design
And
of
the
this.
detail.
And the detail, sure, maybe. But, the main draw is the scale. They built all of this. They went to these places.
They hired
did all of this stuff
20,000 people
practically.
to sit in the stadium.
Absolutely, they
Yeah.
did. And it shows. Tucker, we had the complaints about this being a long movie, but Tucker brought up a good point while we were watching, is that, like, because they did all this, it earns that 3-hour, 40-minute runtime, and that cements it as maybe, like, the genre-defining epic. And I think that's where this film really succeeds.
Yeah, I'm pretty much in agreement with all you guys. I was, I started watching it, and I watched about the first hour, and then when I was done, I had to fall asleep. It was late at night, and I was very tired, but I was like, what? This movie kind of came out of left field for me. I had some reason to believe that the visual fidelity of it wasn't quite up there, but I was absolutely wrong. This film is beautiful. I think we are going to dive into the story and kind of pick it apart, but on its real, filmmaking elements wise, this thing just is a feat, an incredible feat of how did they do that, and that they probably couldn't do it like they did again. And I it's long. I think the story is pretty meandering, but despite that, I find there are interesting moments here and there, and I particularly find myself drawn to the setting. That's one of the things I really like about this film, is that Roman times, biblical times are not really represented a lot. So in film and media, and I feel like the way that this film portrays the Romans and the legions and the soldiers and all that has inspired a lot of our popular cultures. How do I think about a Roman dressing? Well, it looks pretty much exactly like they do in this film. It might be the fault of the production designers here. So that's kind of where I'm coming at it from a start. Do we want to gush for a little while? You talk about all these production elements, talk about these huge set pieces, or should we get into the nitty gritty of the story first? Which one are you guys feeling?
I'm okay with gushing a little bit.
Okay.
I have some production notes and things of that nature. Should we start with the big chariot race, or should we end on the big chariot race?
Let's end on that, because
talk?
I want to go to a different thing that I'm very curious about, is the boat battles, the boat scenes.
Crazy. We were talking about that as it was wrapping up, because it's one of those things that I think it sort of comes out of left field in terms of we jump right into it. Like, they get attacked and bam, we're like into full production, all of it. The amount of extenuating factors there that make that scene difficult to work with are off the charts, and it still works very well, which of course is testament to William Wyler's skill as a director. But you've got water and you got fire, which those are battling, our Avatar references. We got tons and tons and tons of actors and extras that are all doing things. You've got destructible sets that are coming apart around them. You've got smoking off in the background. Boats are in the water. You got external shots. Are they miniatures? I have no idea.
They are.
Okay,
that is
the fact that you couldn't tell. That's pretty good. But I was just blown away by that, and because it's so hard to balance even one of those things, and they managed to do it with all of them in one sequence.
Yeah, and it's very convincing for a film that came out in '59. This film and its effects look very good. You know, we talked about American in Paris. There's some green screening going on, some blue screening going on here with some matte painting and whatnot. And I can kind of tell, but it's not, you know, jarring. It doesn't bring me out. I look at that and I think about how I, as you know, in the modern age, do green screening or whatnot. I'm like, wow, these guys were better than I am in '59 at like keying out backgrounds and whatnot, which is a difficult thing to do. So props to the effects guys on those sequences.
It did win Best Visual Effects this year.
Yeah, well earned. Well deserved.
Completely
Yeah,
to the surprise of about nobody.
It would be maybe one of the largest robbings of all time, Oscar robs of all time, if it didn't win visual effects. Quick note: William Wyler hired quite a few amputees to portray people on the boat as people are getting, you know, arms and stuff cut off. They had prosthetic hands, so it was actually their actual injury that was being displayed on screen, and the prosthetic hand was being cut off.
Huh. That's pretty cool.
I think that the boat sequence is the best part of the film. I think this is when it's firing on all cylinders, where the scope feels important, where there's a chaos that feels so clearly orchestrated but still very kinetic and very engaging. There is, of course, the knowledge, okay, Ben-Hur is going to make it out of here. We kind of know what's going to happen, but it unfolds in such an organic way that highlights sort of the awe-inspiring elements of the film's production, but maybe doesn't draw such distinct attention to them, like the chariot sequence, which is incredible, but definitely more self-indulgent, I think, than the boat sequences.
Sure.
And we also get, I think, really great character beats here, really interesting historical elements. This was the part of the film when I was the most engaged, when I wasn't talking to Tucker or Tanner about some element of the film or something unrelated entirely. This is, I think, when the filmmaking was most dialed in.
I think you make an important point about the characters, too. There is story in this scene. It's not just a battle that we're watching for a battle's sake. There are characters. Ben-Hur is trying to escape, and then the extended sequence afterward where Jack Hawkins' character and Ben-Hur are hanging out on the raft, and they get picked up, and he's like, if that's a square sail, we're both dead, because they were both convinced that they'd lost the battle because it was so chaotic, and you know the ship sank and everything, all that elements of chaos in the scene, and that comes to a payoff when actually, oh, you won, you're a war hero, you've done a great deed to the Roman Empire, now you're gonna go back and live a life of luxury and peace and whatnot. And I think that is a particularly satisfying and good moment of the film, story-wise, that does it connect a huge amount to the rest of the plot? I mean, it moves it forward in its kind of like happenstance, like, oh, crazy stuff happens to Ben-Hur way. I don't know, but it's cool. I like seeing that moment there at the end, which leads us into the Roman settings, which have cool sets too. I think the film does an excellent job with sets all around. Every set in this film is like meticulously designed and looks beautiful and provides beautiful shots, which is what you want.
The thing to focus on most for those sets is just the absolutely ludicrous scale. I mean, they built all of this, and it was, I made some jokes throughout. It's like, hey, William, how tall you want this arch? And he's like, you don't want to know. And then they just make it, like 200 feet tall, whatever. And they use the pan up and down to, like, scale the fact that these are people walking through this giant thing that they built, and the walls are going all the way up and all these crazy sets. And not only that, but you have people deep in the background doing things in full garb and with all their props and things. And even just the simple, like, interior sets of a throne room or the courtyard in someone's house are impeccable. And I think that's probably my favorite aspect of it. That combined with the beautiful Technicolor, really saturated greens and reds that come off of the
color in this film is beautiful.
The costume design. I was blown away by that, and even in sequences where I was a little bit bored by the dialogue occasionally, I was still gripped by what I was able to look at. Like, wow, they really made all of this.
One of my favorite set piece sets was the house of Ben-Hur. Ben-Hur's house that he has in Jerusalem. And it's before he goes away and when he comes back. It's a very interesting transformation. I find those night scenes when they're up on the top and they're in that room with the windows kind of, and they've got the lattices there and they're looking out. That is like stunningly beautiful. It's just really, really great cinematography And that, I think that scene is the one, like right before he goes away, is fairly touching too. It works on a story level for me as well. But then when he comes back and the place is like muted, it's so gray. This film has been so colorful the whole time, and then we come back and like it's almost monochromatic in that it's just leaves.
Dark. There's no lights.
Yep, there's nothing. And that is a really great contrast to what we've seen before. And I'm sure they saved some good money by filming at that location twice, even though I don't think that was the goal of this film.
Oh, absolutely not.
Let's bring it back to a Quest classic,
Yes.
subtleism. And because I think Timo is beating around the subtleism bush there, because I think that for all the set piece moments, a lot of the successful little beats for me in Ben-Hur are small. We were talking a lot about the exchange when Masala meets Ben-Hur after he comes back and he gives him the dagger, and there are these great little dialogue exchanges. They're the awesome little set moments that Timo is talking about. The film doesn't forget the small details in paying homage to these broad strokes of the chariots and of the boat battles and all of the horses and everything. It's the true success of Ben-Hur, I think, is how it operates on all of those different scales for as big as the movie is.
Yeah, and like when Tanner was saying at the beginning, like it's really about the scale, which that's not contestable. Like you have to agree with that. But I do think it's the impressive idea of it being scale with detail. When you're looking at these sets, and there are people doing things in the background, and everyone has like era accurate costuming and props and everything. That like it's a combination of the two that makes this on another level. Because you can get plenty of high scale movies, but if there's not the detail there, it can feel a little bit empty. And this one does both.
Well, funny you say that, Tucker, because I think we can attribute
trivia.
a lot of that to... No, not trivia. Well, a little bit of trivia. But I think we can attribute a lot of that to William Wyler. I think I was reading through some stuff. Obviously, he's a very talented director, and this was a huge undertaking for him to oversee. But he apparently wasn't crazy about the use of widescreen because he felt that it really hindered the ability for the audience to see detail in frame. He's like, if you're using widescreen, you're gonna have a bunch of stuff that is useless for that frame. So what he did was he just packed stuff in there. He just made sure people were moving in the background, and there was layers of things for the audience to look at, that there was no wasted space in this. And I think it really shows, because he also doesn't use a lot of tracking shots in this. What he'll do is, a lot of times, he'll set the camera still and have the cast move back and forth across the frame, touching things, moving back and forth, talking to each other.
Sure.
I think Charlton Heston had some anecdote about William Wyler made him do a take 15, 20 times, because the first time he did it, he touched something or just out of curiosity or sheer instinct, and he didn't do it again. And William Wyler wanted him to do that, to interact with the set, to make it seem more lived in.
Sure.
Which they do.
Yeah.
They feel
Yeah.
incredibly real for the sets of this time. You think about how films were made back in this in 50s, late 50s, early 60s, and that these sets were all built. Do you know where they filmed this, Tanner?
There was a few places. They filmed in Italy. They filmed in Spain. A lot of European. The ship stuff was done in Culver City, California, on the MGM set. Fun fact, trivia fact about the filming locations: the original desert stuff was being filmed in Libya, which was a Muslim country. I think it might be still, but at the time it certainly was. And when the authorities learned that, and that this film is very clearly about Christianity, they're like, okay, well, you guys have to leave because we're not going to allow that. So they had to film desert stuff in Spain, which is apparently the only desert in Europe.
Yeah.
I did not know that.
Yeah, it is. It works for me. These sets feel totally lived in, and they feel real, as opposed to other sets of the time, is what I was trying to really get at there.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there was only, of course we noticed a couple green screen moments, or blue screen, but the fact is that even when they were using matte backdrops,
They look great.
I could only tell maybe once, and other than that, it's so fluid with the way that they connect it to the background that it just works. There's no moments you're like, yeah, this was built on a set or a stage, a sound stage. Oh, this has a matte backdrop. No, you're paying attention to a lot of other stuff and not that ever.
Yeah. Should we talk about the chariot race? Should we just do it? Should we just do it
Anything else to
Here's my
say?
perspective.
Yeah.
Here's
Okay,
my
okay.
perspective. I think we should almost make a compliment sandwich of sorts and
Okay.
kind of loop back around to this at the end.
Sure,
Because
sure. I agree.
This is an epic, and whenever
Yeah.
you think about an epic, think about reading something like the Odyssey, the Iliad, or something. Things just happen to take up time, and I feel like a big issue with this film is that events happen to get the characters someplace, but it takes a while to move them there, and in the process, we introduce ideas and characters that don't feel like they carry. The biggest example for me that I was talking with the boys about when we were watching is that apparently Ben-Hur has some kind of history with the Roman circus. That's why he's such a good chariot racer. But we never really see that, you know? We never really see that established earlier, or the Jesus stuff. Here's Jesus, whom we never see the face of, which we'll talk about at the beginning. He's back at the end. He's bookending this. This is a Christian movie, but ultimately, does that pull does our walk from Nazareth to wherever, does that pull focus from Ben to give it to Christ? What's going on? I just feel like there's a lack of focus that is intrinsic to the genre, but not productive, I think, for Ben-Hur feeling as cohesive and detailed as the actual production that created it.
Yeah, because it is, at the end of the day, I guess it is like a revenge story on the part of Ben-Hur.
Sure,
But
yeah.
it doesn't feel like he has a lot of like driving agency, because it is sort of meandering, and that is the nature of it being a very long movie. But even when he gets his revenge, when Masala dies after the chariot race, we got some movie tacked on there, and then there's the very strange thing of like he comes to regret his vengeance after he already exacted it, but that sort of character flip is maybe 30 seconds before the movie ends. So
Yeah.
I would say that especially Ben-Hur's character maybe isn't paced out very well, and also it doesn't help that I don't think Charlton Heston is a very nuanced performer in this movie.
My problem with the pacing of the story isn't that it is that it's too long in sequences. I think there are some sequences that could very clearly have been cut down a little bit. Shots could have been clipped a little bit, keep it moving a little better. But is that I don't think it's tied together well. We have a few examples of setup and payoff of things, and I was like, oh, they're doing some setup and payoff
Hey.
for these sequences, yeah. But is that it doesn't tie together well at the end, though I was pretty damn invested in his character for the majority of the runtime. I think his relationship with Masala is really interesting. I think the conflict of their ideas that's introduced at the beginning is they were childhood best friends, but they have come now into very opposing viewpoints, and how is that going to affect the way they interact with each other? Is that going to take precedent over their friendship? I think that's a really interesting concept that, because we lose Masala for most of the runtime, isn't really played out, but just the fact that that's really essentially what's fueling his character the entire time, I think that's really interesting. And it is those moments of Ben-Hur, Judah Ben-Hur, having agency that are when his character shines the brightest. Abram was talking about the fact that this movie balances its scope and its smaller moments, especially in that the seafaring battle, because that's the moment he has most agency, right? Of course, he's unlocked by the guy, but he decides that I'm going to free everyone and then go save this guy that has been keeping me on this boat for 3 years, right? That's one of the best character moments for him. And of course, even if, Timmy, you were saying you don't really think it plays into the larger story, I think that's a really defining moment for his character and one of the most, emotionally charged sequences, because not only are you following him do something crazy, escaping a boat, saving people, whatever, it's built off of a 3-year time skip of him just being, like, he thinks his family's dead, he's trapped as a slave, like, he's completely done. He's desperate. And we're seeing that finally play out, and I think that's really interesting.
I think that it's another good example of his innocence of him killing the governor too. He wants to prove that he didn't do that on purpose. And to show that is why he chooses, I think, to save them like that. Beyond him just being a good person as he is throughout most of the film. I want to kind of connect. Abram, you said that as in the epic genre, there's a lot of meandering going on, like in the Odyssey and the Iliad, and I feel like those stories play into my interpretation of why things happen a lot. And like Tucker, you said, like, oh well, Masala's missing the whole time. Basically, like, 2/3 of the movie he's not really in
Yeah.
it. And I find that even though he isn't in it, that backgrounded information of, oh, we know Ben-Hur wants to and has to do stuff to A, get back to his family, and B, enact his revenge. And so I'm kind of okay with seeing him do this other stuff that isn't directly related, like happens in the Odyssey, particularly when he's trying to get back, when, you know, whatever his name is, trying to get back to his family after fighting in the war. And so when we're in Rome and whatnot, and yeah, there's beautiful sets and all that kind of stuff. And I understand, like, oh, well, we're pretty distant from this main plot, but I'm still connected enough. It's just a little bit. It's not a lot of connection, but it's there enough for me to be mostly invested through those parts. And truth be told, those move pretty quickly until we're back in Judea, and we're learning about the horse races, and we're getting ready for this, you know, what feels like it's going to be the big climactic moment of the chariot race, which kind of isn't, but that's okay, I guess.
Well, if we're going to talk about climax, I kind of want to talk about a disconnection and kind of get a temperature check on this, because I'm not a boy of faith, I suppose you can say. I really have no connection.
I don't think any of us are.
Yeah,
Not
I have
really.
I have no connection to the religious elements of this film, which obviously, depending on who you are going to prop up how cohesive the film feels to you.
Yeah.
What do you think about the balance the film strikes, or in my opinion, attempts to strike, between the sort of like religious reverence that it's supposed to evoke and the more, I don't know if like grounded and gritty is the right term, but Ben-Hur's revenge story, and kind of how these track against each other, and of course the water from Jesus, the water to Jesus. I just don't know if the film does a good job balancing those, especially if, and not in an offensive way, but if you don't care about the religious material that they're trying to promote.
I could definitely see how this film would be like the biblical Forrest Gump of Ben-Hur just meeting, like, he meets Pontius Pilate and he meets the Emperor of Rome, who isn't Julius Caesar. Or is
Tiberius.
it Julius Caesar?
It's Tiberius.
Tiberius, thank you. He meets Tiberius and he meets Pontius Pilate. And I'm pretty sure Balthazar is also a biblical
Jesus,
character.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, and obviously Jesus, he has a few run-ins with. But yeah, I can
That
definitely
wacky
see.
old fella.
Yeah, he's a little rabble-rouser, isn't he?
They said that word in this movie, which felt out of place, but that was an interesting moment.
Yeah. But yeah, I can definitely see a criticism of this being like, we drop these things in every so often for the audience to be like, oh, hey, a Bible reference. But I think it does just largely serve the setting, because it doesn't happen a lot throughout the runtime, as opposed to a film we'll get to, Forrest Gump.
I suppose my problem with it, Tanner, is that it doesn't show up a lot, but when it does, it becomes fundamentally important. Especially in the leper sequence, Ben becomes basically backgrounded for this sort of really quick conversation about, you know, the resurrection of Christ and the curing of Miriam's leprosy and everything. And I just think that doesn't track very well with a lot of what the film is trying to do.
I agree that specific sequence doesn't, but in large parts, the other religious sequences work well enough for me. I have a okay understanding of the Bible and you know, this time period, like, historically, and so to see that stuff come up is enough for me to be like, oh yeah, okay, oh, that's Jesus. I could tell because he's wearing the Jesus clothes, like, and then I'm like, oh, okay, cool, and he does this thing, and I'm like, oh yeah, I suppose he would do that because he's a good dude or whatever.
He was a good dude or whatever.
so throughout most everything in the film, besides from those very, very overt sequences, it works for me because it's not like super heavy-handed, and it you know, it has some effect. It there's some push and pull within the actual plot there. And even though I can tell what the film is trying to tell me about religion, it doesn't feel like that's the only thing that I'm getting from it. You know, there's more to this film than just that, but it also represents the Christian aspect fairly well.
I feel like, and this might be some sort of mission statement on the film, it uses the scale and the production design as a crutch. And mind you, it's a very sparkly, bedazzled crutch that I like to look at, but it feels like a crutch nonetheless for a story that sort of lacks the love up, and a message that's a little vague, and, you know, some pacing issues that really are extenuated by the long runtime. But yeah, I think that those are my general feelings on the film that I might be giving away a little too early. But what about you guys?
Well, for me to give my thoughts on the religious aspect of it, I think it's interesting to be touching on these things, especially because obviously it's in the time period, and that's a lot of the background focus of the movie is the politics and the ways that religion is influencing different groups to fight one another. And I think those are interesting thematically. My problem comes down to when we get 2 or 3 characters that know everything about the time period because they live in it, and it was written by people who have a very large reverence for the Bible and these specific names and these events and stuff that aren't, for a large part, shown in the movie, and it gets some of these conversations get really wordy really fast, and I just started to lose a little bit of sight on it because when I'm watching this movie, I'm watching it for Ben-Hur, his relationship with Masala, his family, the ways that he interacts with the world, and when they stop and talk about the history of Rome and the evolution of religious, practices and stuff, and they're using big boy, big brain words that I have not heard before and references to people and places that I'm not familiar with, I got not only lost but bored pretty quickly. And those conversations can go on for a long time because, as we said, this film is not concise, and I think that's very clear from its 3:40 runtime. But those sequences I thought kind of pull away from what I was watching it for, which is, as I said, Ben-Hur. So while I know that I'm not the target audience for this movie, I mean, it was still part of my experience. And if a lot of those had been cut out and this had been a snappier Ben-Hur epic with a lot of wordy dialogue, I would have enjoyed it a lot more. But not that those are the biggest focus of the movie, because those are on the whole a smaller subset of the sequences. So while it's a pretty big complaint in those sequences, I'm kind of able just to turn my brain off and come back to when they were talking about something that I understood, catch up a little bit, and then just get back to what I was caring about. So take that as you will. It's a complaint, but not a huge one.
Yeah, it's they happen, and sometimes I'm a little like, oh well, and then it's like, okay, well, we're back in it, and I don't mind them, I guess, is how I could put it.
Yeah. I think part of the reason why I view it as maybe a larger problem is I think it's intrinsic to the message and the themes of this movie, which I said a little bit earlier are a little vague because Ben-Hur has the conversation.
Saying vague properly, by the way.
I know. Thank you very much. He has that I wrote down some quotes here. He has the conversation with his centurion, overseer on the boat, where he says, where they have this back and forth about religion, and I think it's the centurion. I forget his name. It's the guy who adopts him also.
Yeah, Jack Hawkins' character.
Yeah, he says a sane man would have lost his religion long before this, and then he has a conversation with Balthazar in the sheik's tent, where Balthazar is like, "Hey, you shouldn't be seeking vengeance like this. You should have faith in God's plan." A little Drake reference there, but yeah, I don't really know how all those things tie together, because Ben-Hur still gets his revenge, and again doesn't feel bad about it until the last 2 minutes of the film.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think
Abram, you can go ahead.
Well, what I was going to say is I don't think it's a film that undercuts itself or really contradicts itself. I think it's a film that just doesn't lean into any thematic material really at all.
Yeah,
frankly, in my opinion, I don't think the movie is very deep. I think it probably should have been a little bit more complex thematically than it is. So take that how you will.
Yeah.
One thing that I felt, and I agree with you, I think the themes are pretty vague, because when we look at it, there's plenty of ideas of talking about the conflict between religion and non-religious people, or the differences between religions. I think it's really interesting when the Roman people are talking about how ridiculous they find the Jewish faith to be, and they're like, oh, you have one God, we have many. Those things are interesting thematically. I wish they'd played a little bit more into that, especially with, and I think this is one of my favorite sequences in the movie that isn't one of those epic ones, when Masala and Ben-Hur meet at the beginning of the movie. They first time meeting, presumably for 15 years, whatever, since they were children.
Yeah.
And they talk about how they've grown different ways, and how one of them is Roman, one of them is Jewish, and conflict between that. And one of them says somewhere in there, or around that, someone says, how do you fight an idea? And they were talking about how the rise of Christianity is taking away from people's belief in the Romans and their reign. That's what I thought was going to be the theme throughout the whole thing, is the ways that religion and Christianity is toppling the Roman Empire. And I was like, wow, this is going to be a great theme. That's a one-word theme that I think is really interesting to delve into. How do you fight an idea? Is the idea pushing down the religion? Is it the idea of the conquerors, versus the conquered, whatever? And in that sequence, I think you also have some of the best acting from both Charlton Heston and Stephen Boyd. Stephen Boyd, by the way, and I think we should talk about this, way better than Charlton Heston.
Absolutely.
Messala is the shining jewel of this movie from Stephen Boyd's performance. His emotion and glee and sadness on his face is insane.
Yeah.
But yeah, the themes being a little bit vague, I think, is probably just because they wanted to be like, well, yeah, this is about the Bible, and we know what everyone knows what the Bible is about. You've all read it, so I don't know. Maybe it's not in the film enough because they expect there to be some sort of pre-built knowledge of this is what the religious faith
morality, good and bad. Yeah. I want to spin what Tucker said about Stephen Boyd and Charlton Heston into my quick take on the performances. Again, I totally agree with Tucker. Stephen Boyd is a much better actor than Charlton Heston in this. Charlton Heston really has one mode, and that is like reserved edging on anger, or just full on anger, really. And I think largely the Ben-Hur character works for that. I mean, he can really sell those lines when like he's like fuming at Messala. I think he has that great one that's like, where is it? If you find my mother and daughter, I'll forget what I vowed with every stroke of the oar that you chained me to. He can really sell lines like that, but when it's quieter moments,
and he's trying to be
much.
suave and in love. Yeah, his romantic dialogue was not the most romantic. I was kind of feeling like, dude, what are you doing? You gotta turn it on, man. You put on the show here for this woman that you apparently love. Because I wasn't really feeling it from him in those moments.
Yeah, that was a weird relationship, wasn't it?
I think Tucker said while we were watching, he's like, imagine if Charlton Heston and Messala had, like, and Stephen Boyd had switched roles. I mean, Stephen Boyd in that leading role would have been a lot more nuanced, which I appreciate. God. Yeah.
That would have been fantastic. But also, that's a hypothetical, whatever.
Hypothetical.
But the reason Charlton Heston's performance, which I think is still solid, doesn't shine as brightly as it should, is because he's just outshoneth by Stephen Boyd as Messala, who just is, as I said, the crowning jewel. I can't remember what I was gonna say.
Well,
should we gallop to the
should we talk about a good sequence with Stephen Boyd and Charlton Heston going head to head in the arena, the circus?
All right, so I haven't had a lot of trivia thus far, but you better believe that there's lots of trivia about this chariot race, because
that is exactly
trivia count for one sequence in the entirety of Oscar history.
That is what I was hoping for, Tanner.
I've whittled it down to two main ones, two ones that I think are the most interesting. But I'll see what you guys think. So I think Timo will appreciate this one as a physical film loving individual. The chariot race has a 263 to 1 cutting ratio, which means that 263 feet of film were shot for every 1 foot used. Probably the highest. Oh my
god!
Probably the highest for any 65mm sequence ever filmed.
Holy crap!
That's wild.
So, oh my god.
So yeah, for every 263 feet of physical film used for that chariot sequence, they used 1 foot.
Which means that, like, cost-wise, each second of film cost 263 seconds or whatever, like times that much to make. Because a foot of film doesn't exactly equate to time, but that is an insane amount more than they actually used. Wow.
Yes.
That's kind of mind-blowing.
There's also a little bit of tying back to a near past Quest episode. William Wyler asked David Lean to direct the chariot race because of his work on Bridge on the River Kwai. But David Lean said, "No, William, you are a talented director. You can do it yourself."
Wow.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I mean, he did a good job. I would like to see what David Lean would do with it, but I feel like it would be very different than the rest of the film and whatnot. And the sequence works pretty damn well otherwise. Do you have any numbers on like how many extras were in that? Did they like really build that entire thing? I feel like they did. It kind of looks like it when they're shooting around in there.
They kind of had to have. I mean, especially with the shots that they've used.
It was the largest film set ever built at the time. It covered 18 acres.
That's pretty big.
Constructed at the cost of $1 million, it took 1,000 workmen more than a year to carve the oval out of a rock quarry.
Holy shit, that was actual rock.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And I think wow is just the term to use for this sequence, because everyone, I want to hear your thoughts on this, considering what you said. Probably the most impressive piece of filmmaking you've ever seen in your life, and I mean, I'm inclined to agree.
I mean, you gotta just think about what we just saw. Those those were horses, and that sounds really stupid coming out of my mouth, but just think about that. Those were horses that they had running around, and they had all of the cameras. It's not like if they had one wide shot and the horses are going and they're going, that's one thing. But the ways that the camera is so engaged in the sequence, and it is so kinetic, and there is so much movement, and these horses are going all over the place, and you got the people in the chariots, and you're seeing the cut-ins to Masala's little, like, Sebulba cheat code he's got to make a Phantom Menace reference. The way that it all comes together is so kinetic and so impressive when you consider you can't tell a horse, okay, today this is what we're gonna do, right? And then you add in the actors, you add in the scope, you add in the scale, and again, it's about the macro and the micro. It's about the seeing people get trampled, seeing Ben-Hur flip over.
Yeah,
Oh
that
my
was
God,
that was
it's
a
incredible.
real stuntman. It was the son of, I should say that I think probably William Wyler oversaw the directing of those sequences, but the directors of the chariot sequence were Andrew Martin and Yakima Knut. Yakima Knut's son is the one who did the Ben-Hur chariot. He accidentally jumps out and does like a flip over it, and it has to climb back in. The stunt was performed by Yakima Knut's son.
Yeah. And I think for me, my first thought when I'm watching this is, there's a lot of shots that are pretty similar. We get a lot of ones that are, close up of the horses running, and you get the white ones and then the black ones. You get a lot of close up on wheels and stuff. And my first thought is, why wouldn't this cut down? But then this is really where my complaints of the runtime kind of inherently have to dissolve, because as one of either Tanner or Abram was saying at the beginning, my thought process is they did this. They actually went through the process of A, building this giant set, but B, having horses, and C, having stunts, and D, the actors.
Not just like 4 horses. They had like 30 horses on the track running around, and they're like in sync, and it's like
78 horses were used for the sequence.
Jesus Christ, that's a lot.
Yeah, exactly. That's my point, is they went through the trouble of doing this, so let them indulge. I think they earned it. I think we talk a lot about a movie earning its runtime or justifying its runtime in terms of the ways that its characters play out, or are these sequences too long? The sequence was long, but it was justified because of the production value that went into it. If they had to cut more of it, they're like, oh, but that was also a cool shot that literally endangered people's lives. Like, we want to show that to you. So they did. And I think that it's probably a sequence I'll end up rewatching, which is something that I don't really do very often. But there were enough moments of us, like, and this doesn't happen very often, like gripping our seats and like seeing what's gonna happen or a stunt happening. And
it's mostly when they
do that.
They have the dummies flying under and getting chewed up by the horses in the chariots.
But the dummies are very well built. I just want to add.
Very well built.
I was like, oh shit, that guy ate it,
There's
man.
Also,
he's dead.
What I want to know is the stuntman who had to do the Masala thing when he's underneath the chariot, because that's not there's a cut.
He's moving around.
There's a quick shot where it's very clearly a actual guy underneath the chariot holding on, and that is I want to know who did that stunt, because that is absolutely crazy.
One thing that I did notice, I only noticed it at one time. They did. I could see the tire tracks of the truck driving around in one shot, which is impressive to me, given that there's a lot of sand in there and there's a lot of other tracks that we're looking, and it's like they must have had sand rakers to go out there and fix up that sand to make it appear right after the truck had driven around a couple times with the camera on the back of it.
Yeah.
And I mean, film film exaggerates speed, so they might not have actually been moving as fast as it appeared, but they still looked like they were moving very fast.
Yes, it was certainly dangerous. And obviously, I should shout out the chariot scene took 5 weeks, spread over the course of 3 months to film, at the total cost of $1 million in 1958 money. I don't have the conversion for that, but it's probably a lot of money. And one last thing, the way that the filming shook out, you only needed about 1,500 extras on any given day. 1950s Italy, they were in a bit of economic straits, so probably not on purpose, I'm going to assume, the filming of Ben-Hur accidentally caused somewhat of a labor riot in Italy at the time. There was a group of 3,000 people waiting to be picked out to be extras, and they only took 1,500, so they were not happy about not having the money for that day.
Yeah, I mean, just the number of extras in the scene, even 1,500 is a huge amount to have on set.
Yeah, that's a ton of people.
To corral, well,
Yes.
to costume. They have to be wearing the clothes. The clothes and the costuming in the scene is great. I find that Tucker, your problem with fantasy, that it all looks like the same, is not a problem in this scene. The horses are different colors. The chariots are very different in appearance. The costumes are very different, and so you can immediately see who's who, even from these side characters, from the other regions of the Roman Emperor that aren't very important, and they don't really, they die or they get thrown off the chariot or whatever, and it's like, okay. But it's very visually clear what's going on in the scene, and they've got the hook with the fish to pull down to see the laps, and we see almost every single one of them get turned down. Talk about the runtime, dang, it's set up 9 laps, and I'm counting in my head as we go around, okay, that was another lap. We only have 8 more. What's he gonna do? How's he gonna pull it off?
Yeah.
And then at the end, when Pontius Pilate gives the wreath to Ben-Hur, and he turns around to the crowd, and there's all those people, and they all react, and they throw their arms up in the air, and it's
yeah,
man, that's a sequence.
It is. Wow.
Seeing the depth of field and how well it's utilized, especially in that shot, you see people in the foreground that are, the high elites that are watching it from that special box, and then you've got their guards, and then the people around them, and then down below, the people on the racetrack, and then the horses that are with them, and then across the way, you got more people. You got people in the middle. You got people in the stands. It's one of those moments that gives you, filmmaking chills, and you're like, Jesus, goddamn Christ, how'd they do this? Whoo, boy. Whoo, Nelly.
Yeah, it's quite the scene to gush about. I mean, yeah. That he pulled it off is a pretty great miracle.
And I have never more in my life, I think, wanted to watch a behind-the-scenes production of a sequence, because just from the construction, but also, obviously, to the cinematography and the stunts and all of that, I mean, there's got to be a Ben-Hur documentary out there, or at least, behind-the-scenes footage that is, extras on Blu-rays or whatever. I'm gonna find them, and I'm gonna watch them.
All right. Well, I think it's time that we do a little thinking here. Everybody, pull up our spreadsheet. Put your cursor on your box. We've got our great big tabulation, and just punch in that number really quickly of what you think the film gets from a vote wise. Everyone, punch it in really quick. Boom. I'm gonna hit mine.
There it is. Oh my
There we
goodness.
go.
There we go. And our vote is totaled up really quickly for a total score of 8.1. So that's pretty
solid.
high
There
up
you
there.
go.
That is
There you are.
quite high. Now we do have to do a little figuring real quick. 8.1 has the exact same score as One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. I don't think we're gonna have quite a lot of debate about this. What's your thinking on above or below that specific film?
Above.
Abram says above. Tucker says above. I say above. Tanner.
I'm gonna say below, just because I think the story of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest is much tighter than the story of Ben-Hur. But I
don't disagree with that.
Yeah, I still think that the thing I said about the production design is that it's a very big and sparkly crutch that I can respect very much. But at the end of the day, I think film comes down to story over flashy production design, for me anyway.
Now,
Yep.
I would say I agree.
Okay.
However, and I think I started my thesis on this film, the fact that this film, for one of the first times in this series, makes me just think right off the bat, oh yeah, of course this won Best Picture, right? And we're talking about a movie from 1959 that has some of the best filmmaking we've ever seen in our lives in it. I think that alone, even if there's parts of the story that don't work very well, puts it above almost everything. And this isn't one of, like, if I was watching this solely from a story perspective, it'd probably be a little bit weaker.
Yeah.
But the experience of this film, I think, is what it's the magic of filmmaking. Like, this is something that I sometimes complain about scale, or I'm like, oh yeah, you know, like I'm more story guy, but this one pushed past that, and it made me go, holy shit.
I think another thing is, because I watched this on my own, and then I rewatched most of it with you and Abram, and I was more engaged watching it with you and Abram. I think that's just nature of, I had someone to, like, talk about elements of the film with, whereas when I watched this on my own, I was bored whenever we were in between, when we were in those dialogue sequences.
Sure.
So I think we should know quickly, this is place 18. I think we said the average, but not the place.
No,
so
well,
this goes at number...
No,
right?
this place would go at 17.
Yes.
So above
17.
One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and below Spotlight.
Well, there we go.
There
So
we
what I
are.
wanted to, what I wanted to note is, I think I gave this the lowest score out of all of us. I gave it a 7.1 out of 10. And I skew more towards Tanner. My thought is that the scale of this film and its ability to have these really great small moments is what makes it a good film, in my opinion. I don't think it's because of the characters. I don't think it's because of the plot. I don't think it's because of the themes. And I think that those things are really important when you're talking about the best picture winner. So for me, I can't say that it is, in my opinion, anything more than a good film, especially when you're comparing it to the best movies we have here. Even something like Lord of the Rings: Return of the King has a scope in a different way with modern technology, of course, but incredible scope, incredibly complex. Some might say meandering storytelling, but I think it all links into something larger that feels more cohesive. I don't think Ben-Hur feels cohesive to me at all. So while something like the boat sequence and the chariot and the little production details make it incredibly impressive, there's more, in my opinion, to the score and my figuring of it than just that feel. And I think that it's exterior to that where the film kind of doesn't meet the grade, in my opinion.
Sure.
Okay.
Timo, give us the epic boy final thoughts.
Well, yeah, I love epic films. This film is thoroughly entertaining to me, despite its runtime. It's beautiful. I love the score of this film. The score we didn't even get to mention is really, really good. And I'm kind of a sucker for scale, just like big sequences that blow my mind. I love them. I love to see them. And while I agree that the story, like, definitely has weak points, it doesn't. I'm distracted enough by everything else that it doesn't matter too much. And there are satisfying moments, and there are, you know, the little moments, and the you know, the broad strokes of it are there enough for me to really like what's going on here. I gave it a 9 because I think it's just from a feat perspective. How I can't even imagine beginning to think about trying to pull something this big off. And so the fact that it got pulled off and it's here, and that it just feels so good, you know, however many years it's been, many years, 50 years or more, since it came out.
Yeah.
Like 60 years now.
Over 60, yeah.
So
Final bit of trivia, that since Timo shouted out the score, and we'll pay a little tribute to it since we didn't talk about it at all. I believe the composer's name is pronounced Miklos Rosa, is how I'm going to assume. I'm very sorry if I mispronounced that. But he won 3 Oscars in his time, and he said this is the one he was the most proud of because of how complex the whole thing was, and how long it had to be, and how varied.
Yeah, it's a good score. It's good to listen to. It comes back. It's got the leitmotifs. It's got everything that you really want from a score. That I'm looking for. Okay.
This guy did some great movie scores.
Is it time? Do you think we should figure out what we're going to watch next week? Are we going to be able to pull something that makes us feel the same way? I think it's time to...
Hopefully we pull something a bit shorter is what I'm gunning for.
We'll see.
We'll
Might be
see.
fun to have another 3-boy long movie.
Oh, alrighty.
Are you ready, Tanner?
I'm getting my pipes warmed up. I'm ready to go here.
All right. 3, 2, 1...
Wheel, what's your deal? Give us a movie that makes us spiel. Is it on digital or is it on real? Wheel, what is your deal?
And you can see that just as well as I can.
Ah.
That is quite the number. What does that mean, Tucker? It's the number 20, the big 20, almost the number of the year. What
That is
film might that be?
It's a newish one, I think, if that's how the list works, correct?
A
90s.
newish one.
Okay,
So
newish.
compared to the history of time, yeah, the 90s
Yeah.
are relatively recent. Tanner, your wish was not granted.
No.
We're looking at a movie at 195 minutes, so it's sitting at 3 hours and 15. 1993. We got Liam Neeson. We got Ben Kingsley.
Oh.
We got Ray Fiennes. Directed by Steven Spielberg.
Mm-hmm.
Schindler's List.
Okay,
Schindler's
I'm here
List.
for this one. I'm very excited for this one.
I'm here
And
for
don't
this
you
too.
whine till I finish saying my
You
thing,
dragged me
you
down.
baby.
I thought maybe we got like the English Patient or something boring, but no. We got Schindler's List. I'm very excited for this one. A famously
never
very
seen it.
good film.
Never seen
Yeah.
it. I'm very excited.
I'm sorry,
Have
but it's
we,
in basically only black and white.
It is in black
Okay.
and white. Have we all seen this film before? Yes or no?
I haven't seen it.
Just said he hadn't, but I have.
Okay, I
For a
have.
long time, I was really bored by it when I saw it the first time, but also I wasn't watching it in the case of a Best Picture whenever my mom was like, hey, this is a movie that people like. I'm like, fine, I'll watch Schindler's List.
This was one of the many movies that my lazy social studies teacher put on instead of teaching us. But I think I was gone for maybe a day of class or something. So I haven't seen this in one sitting all the way through completely. So, very excited.
Well, I personally am a Spielberg enjoyer. I like Spielberg movies, and so I'm
The
really
minority
looking forward to-
opinion.
Yeah, really. Well, you joke, but in the film student circles here, at least down in the University of Texas, Spielberg gets a bit of a bad rap for making
jeez.
films that are
People
A
aren't too
good,
big
that
of
are
nerds.
that are A good and B popular, and so they don't like him.
Two things that film students don't do: make good or popular films.
yeah.
Jesus Christ.
I'm glad you
Film
understood
students like,
the joke.
Martin Scorsese.
Yeah,
You know.
exactly.
That you-
All right. Well,
well.
I'm looking forward to watching this movie. I'm looking forward to spending some time with it, and I'm glad we spent the time to talk about Ben-Hur. You know, this review certainly have gone on quite a long time about this film, but we have to. The film Ben-Hur earns its runtime, and well, it's up to you to decide. But we hope that you think that this episode of Quest earned its runtime. It's almost as long as the one we did last week. We're kind of getting into that nice groove of speaking forever. I like it. I'm down for
Good.
it. I mean, I don't care.
long movies have lots of content to cover, and we'll be covering it all.
Exactly. Schindler's List, not a short movie either. So we will be here to talk about it next week. Thank you for joining me, and we'll see you next time. Peace.
Unless there's like
What if we had
something.
it fixed?
What do you mean if we have it fixed?
Something's wrong because the AC isn't going like it should.
Tucker, I think it's just an old HVAC system, and it's an old house, and the vents aren't updated. I can scroll back to the Jesus
What
Christ.
the fuck was that?